Regional integration in Africa, as we know it today, is the result of multiple progressive steps taken over the years. In this video, we will be looking at the trajectory of Africa's integration. At the peak of the independence movement in the 1960s, Africa's emerging leaders were unanimous on the need to unite for development. However, although there was a general desire to integrate, the nature of such integration was a point of contention. This led to a division and formation of two groups of states. Those that sought immediate economic and political integration, namely the Casablanca Bloc, and those that advocated for gradual cooperation, namely the Monrovia Bloc. Despite the differences in opinion, eventually a compromise was reached that supported the Monrovia Bloc's approach. This led to the establishment of the Organization of African Unity, the OAU, on 25 May 1963. When its first summit was convened in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. The date of its establishment is commemorated as Africa Day. Following the establishment of the OAU, annual summits were held that increasingly emphasized economic integration as a strategy for Africa's development. The establishment of the OAU was only the first of many steps towards integration. Let's look at some other landmark historical events that have shaped Africa's regional integration. In 1976, during an extraordinary summit of the OAU Council of Ministers in Kinshasa, the Kinshasa Declaration was introduced and later adopted in 1977 at the OAU Summit in Libreville, Gabon. The Kinshasa Declaration called for the free ownership and control of natural resources by African countries, and the establishment of an African common market as well as the African Economic Community within 15 to 20 years. The United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, UNECA, concurrently held ministerial conferences that contributed to the direction of integration in Africa. These conferences led to the adoption of the revised master plan for a new international economic order in Africa, which provided a framework for Africa's engagement with the global marketplace. Additionally, it laid out guidelines for African states to be self-reliant. This revised master plan was adopted alongside the Kinshasa Declaration, also at the Libreville Summit in 1977. The slow implementation of the adopted declarations, however, was a cause for concern, and in 1979, the OAU held a brainstorming symposium in Monrovia, Liberia, to evaluate the performance of African states and propose remedies. The symposium was followed by an OAU summit in the same year. This summit saw the adoption of the Monrovia Declaration, which proffered guidelines and measures for member states to create new economic order based on the principle of self-sufficiency. A UNECA African Development Strategy was also adopted as part of the Monrovia Declaration. In 1980, an extraordinary summit of the OAU was held in Lagos, Nigeria. At this summit, the Lagos Plan of Action, LPA, was adopted. The LPA sought to provide an implementation framework for the Monrovia Declaration, and in order to do so, it was given legal effect through the Final Act of Lagos. While the LPA captured the decision of the OAU to establish an African Economic Community in substantive detail, a blueprint for the attainment of this goal still had to be developed. Subsequently, in 1991, the treaty establishing the African Economic Community, commonly referred to as the Abuja Treaty, was adopted and came into force in May 1994. These frameworks set the stage for creating an African Economic Community for Africa's economic integration. The Abuja Treaty sets out the blueprint for achieving the African Economic Community to take place in 6 stages over a period of 34 years. Let's briefly look at each stage. The first stage calls for strengthening existing regional economic communities and the creation of new regional economic communities where necessary. The second stage requires states to gradually eliminate barriers to regional and intra-community trade and to coordinate and harmonize external tariffs. The third stage prescribes the establishment of free trade areas and customs unions at the regional economic community level. This was to be achieved by 2016. The fourth stage aims for the creation of an African customs union by 2018. The fifth stage calls for the adoption of a common policy for all sectors of the economy, a monetary union and a central bank, and the free movement of people. The sixth and final stage is the establishment of the African Economic Community. This is expected to start with the consolidation and strengthening of the African Common Market, with no restrictions on the movement of Africans, goods, capital, and services. This stage also envisages a Pan-African economic and monetary union, a single currency, a central bank, and a Pan-African parliament. While the blueprint for the African Economic Community has not been realized as strictly set out in the Abuja Treaty, it has provided an enduring framework for the evaluation of progress on development, cooperation, and economic integration on the continent. Furthermore, from the 1980s into the 1990s, Africa was beset with multiple challenges, including the negative impacts of the Structural Adjustment Program imposed on it by the Bretton Woods institutions, its marginalization from the global market, its massive debt load, internal conflicts, and mismanagement of resources. To address these challenges, at an extraordinary summit in 1999, the leaders of African states adopted the Sirte Declaration, in which they resolved to create a new organization, empowered and equipped to tackle these challenges as part and parcel of a more comprehensive development agenda. Thus, the African Union, AU, emerged from the 1999 Sirte Summit. In the year 2000, the Constitutive Act of the African Union was adopted in Lomé, Togo, and the final summit of the OAU followed in Lusaka, Zambia in 2001. As the OAU was dissolved, the African Union convened its first summit in Durban, South Africa in 2002.
We have convened at the stadium in Durban in the South African province of KwaZulu-Natal, as we agreed to establish the African Union.
The year 2023 marked the 60th anniversary of the founding of the OAU, and this, in a nutshell, highlights the path Africa's integration has followed in the decades since then.